The machines never stopped. Rows of metal presses pounded through the night, filling the factory with a deafening rhythm of steel against steel. The air was thick with the smell of oil and sweat, and the flickering fluorescent lights made the workers look like ghosts, pale, tired shadows of themselves. For 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, the men and women of Ridgeway Manufacturing gave their lives to the assembly line. In return, they received meager paychecks, barely enough to feed their families. Safety gear was scarce, breaks were shorter than the law allowed, and complaints were met with one simple warning: be grateful you still have a job. Among the workers was Diego Morales, a quiet man in his late 30s. He had worked there for almost 15 years, his back bent and his hands calloused from endless labor. He rarely spoke up, but he saw everything: the injuries that went unreported, the pay cuts disguised as restructuring, the way management pocketed bonuses while workers struggled to survive. And he saw something else too: fear. Fear kept everyone silent, until one night when silence was no longer enough. It happened just after midnight. The factory floor was unusually tense. A shipment deadline loomed, and supervisors prowled like hawks, shouting for more speed. "Faster!" barked Mr. Cutter, the floor manager, a sharp-faced man who treated the workers like disposable parts. "If this order isn't finished by dawn, you'll all regret it." The pressure pushed everyone to the brink. And then screams cut through the pounding machines. A worker named Lena, a young single mother, had gotten her sleeve caught in one of the presses. By the time Diego and 2 others reached her, the damage was done. Her arm was mangled, blood soaking through her shirt. The machines didn't stop. Cutter didn't even flinch. "Get her out of here," he shouted, as though she were nothing more than a broken tool. Diego's stomach turned. Lena was rushed to the hospital, her life forever changed. But the factory kept moving, always moving. That night, Diego lay awake in his small apartment. His daughter, Sophia, slept in the next room, her soft breathing the only sound. He stared at the ceiling, rage simmering in his chest. He remembered Lena's screams, her blood on the floor, Cutter's cold voice. Enough was enough. The next morning, Diego spoke quietly to a few trusted coworkers during their short lunch break. "They'll do this to all of us," he said. "We're nothing to them, just bodies, machines. We need to fight back." The men and women glanced nervously around. Cameras watched from every corner. Cutter's office overlooked the floor like a prison guard tower. "Fight back how?" whispered one of them. "If we complain, they'll fire us. Replace us before the day is done." Diego leaned in, his eyes hard. "Then we don't complain. We stop working. Together. A strike." The word hung in the air, dangerous and forbidden. Over the next week, whispers spread through the factory like smoke. Workers huddled in corners, spoke in code, passed notes instead of words. Diego became the reluctant leader, though he never asked for the role. People trusted him because he wasn't reckless. He listened. He cared. They planned carefully. No signs, no shouts, nothing that could be caught on camera. Just silence. One day, at the same hour, every worker would lay down their tools. The machines would go quiet, and management would be forced to listen. But Cutter wasn't blind. He sensed the tension, the shift in atmosphere. One evening, he cornered Diego near the lockers. "You've been talking too much," Cutter sneered. "I hear things, Morales. Dangerous things." Diego met his gaze but said nothing. Cutter leaned closer, his breath sour. "If I find out you're stirring trouble, you'll be out on the street faster than you can blink. You and your kid. Do you understand?" Diego clenched his fists. For Sophia's sake, he swallowed his anger. "Yes, sir." But inside, his resolve only hardened. The day of the strike drew closer. Diego could feel the tension buzzing through the factory, in every stolen glance, every whispered word. At home, he tried to act normal for Sophia, but she noticed his distraction. "Papa," she asked one night, "why are you so worried?" Diego forced a smile. "Because I want things to be better. For you. For everyone." Sophia hugged him tightly. "You always say the right thing. Her trust gave him strength. At exactly 2 a.m. on a Thursday, the plan unfolded. Cutter's voice echoed across the floor. "Move faster! We're behind schedule." The machines clanged and roared. Sparks flew. Workers sweated under the strain. Then, one by one, the machines stopped. First, Diego shut off his press. Then the man beside him. Then Lena's replacement. Within minutes, the entire factory floor went still. Silence. Cutter's face turned red. He stormed onto the floor. "What the hell are you doing? Get back to work." Nobody moved. The silence was deafening, more powerful than any chant or shout. Hundreds of workers stood shoulder to shoulder, eyes locked on Cutter, their defiance unspoken but undeniable. For the first time, Diego felt something shift. Power. But Cutter's snarl told him this was only the beginning. The factory floor was silent. Machines that had clanged endlessly for years now sat still, their metal jaws frozen. The usual roar of industry was replaced by something far more powerful: unity. Cutter's face was a storm of rage. His sharp voice sliced through the silence. "Get back to work. Now!" No one moved. Workers stood shoulder to shoulder, arms crossed, eyes burning with quiet defiance. Cutter scanned the floor, searching for cracks in their wall of silence. His gaze landed on Diego. "You," he snarled, pointing. "This is your doing, Morales. Don't think I don't know." Diego didn't flinch. He stood steady, meeting Cutter's glare. For once, he didn't feel like a powerless worker. For once, Cutter's words didn't matter. Cutter stormed off the floor, slamming his office door so hard the glass rattled. Minutes later, the intercom crackled. "All workers report to the break room." Immediately, reluctantly, they filed in. The room was cramped, the walls stained from years of neglect. Cutter stood at the front with two men in dark suits beside him. Corporate executives, their suits far too clean for this place. One of them stepped forward. His name was Mr. Halford, a regional director known for crushing union talk wherever it appeared. His smile was thin, cold. "I hear there's been some confusion," Halford said smoothly. "You may think you're being clever, but let me be clear. Strikes are not tolerated. This factory is private property. If you refuse to work, you refuse your paycheck. And if you refuse your paycheck," he paused, letting the threat sink in, "you refuse to feed your families." Murmurs rippled through the workers. Fear spread fast. Halford leaned in. "Return to your machines and this little incident disappears. Keep defying us, and you'll all be out on the street by morning." The workers looked to Diego. He felt their eyes on him, heavy with expectation and fear. His throat was dry, but he forced his voice steady. "You threaten us like we're nothing, but we're the ones who keep this factory alive. Without us, your machines are useless. Without us, you have nothing." Halford's smile vanished. Cutter's fists clenched. Diego continued, louder now. "Lena lost her arm because you cut corners. How many more lives do we have to sacrifice before you care? We're done being silent. We're done being afraid." The room filled with murmurs of agreement. Heads nodded. Shoulders straightened. For the first time, the workers weren't looking down, they were looking up. Halford's eyes hardened. "So be it. You're all fired." Gasps filled the room. By dawn, the factory gates were locked. Security guards patrolled the perimeter, their presence more intimidating than protective. Notices were plastered on the gates. Workers terminated for insubordination. Positions open for replacement. Diego and the others stood outside, stunned. Their lives had been ripped away with a single sentence. But as they looked at one another, something surprising happened. Instead of dispersing, they stayed. They gathered around the gates, holding makeshift signs, chanting in unison. For the first time, their voices broke the silence. "What do we want? Justice. When do we want it? Now." Their chants echoed through the streets. Cars slowed. Neighbors gathered. The strike was no longer silent. It was loud, impossible to ignore. Days passed. The workers held strong, but food ran low, bills piled up, and fear gnawed at them. Cutter and Halford watched from inside, smug behind their fortress of steel gates and private guards. Then came the smear campaign. News articles appeared overnight. Lazy workers jeopardized local economy. Flyers circulated claiming the strikers were violent, ungrateful, even criminals. One evening, Diego found his apartment door spray-painted with a single word: traitor. Sofia clung to his side, her eyes wide with fear. "Papa, what's happening?" she whispered. Diego hugged her tightly. "They want to scare us, but we can't let them win." Inside, though, doubt gnawed at him. How long could they endure? On the 5th day of the strike, a woman approached the picket line. She wore a press badge, a recorder slung around her neck. "Ellen Pierce," she introduced herself. "I cover labor rights. Heard you folks have a story worth telling." Diego exchanged glances with the others. They had heard of Ellen. Her exposés had toppled corrupt companies before. He stepped forward. "We've been threatened, fired, smeared. One of our own was nearly killed because of their negligence. We just want fair treatment, safe conditions, a chance to live with dignity." Ellen's eyes lit with determination. "Then let's make sure the world hears it." By the next morning, the strike was headline news. Photos of weary workers holding signs splashed across newspapers. Videos of their chants spread online. Support poured in from other unions, activists, and ordinary citizens who saw their own struggles reflected in the fight. Donations arrived: food, blankets, money for rent. For the first time, the workers realized they weren't alone. But Halford wasn't done. The very next night, trucks rolled into the factory lot under cover of darkness. Replacement workers, scabs, escorted by guards. As the trucks pulled in, Cutter stepped onto the balcony, smirking down at the crowd. "You see?" he shouted. "You're nothing. Replaceable. By morning, this factory will run without you." The workers' chants faltered. Fear rippled through them. But Diego's voice rose above the uncertainty. "They may replace us on the floor, but they'll never replace our fight. This isn't just about a paycheck. It's about respect. And respect can't be bought." Cheers erupted. The strike held. But Diego knew the real battle was only beginning. The night air was heavy, thick with tension. The factory gates stood under floodlights, guarded like a fortress. Beyond the steel fence, the sound of engines echoed as trucks unloaded replacement workers. Their faces were blank, distant. People desperate enough to cross a picket line. Diego stood at the front of the strikers, fists clenched, heart pounding. Around him, his co-workers shouted and chanted, their voices hoarse from days of resistance. But deep down, everyone knew the balance was shifting. If the factory restarted with scabs, the strike would collapse. At midnight, while the guards weren't looking, someone hurled a brick through a factory window. The shattering glass rang out like a gunshot. The guards scrambled. Alarms blared. For a moment, chaos ruled. Diego turned sharply. "Who did that?" No one answered. Faces turned away, eyes wide with guilt or fear. The next morning, newspapers painted the strikers as violent radicals. Headlines screamed, "Protest turns destructive." Ellen Pierce, the journalist, rushed to the picket line, waving the paper. "They're trying to turn public opinion against you," she warned. "If you're not careful, this strike will be painted as criminal." Diego's stomach sank. "But none of us," he stopped, realizing what this meant. Someone was trying to sabotage them from the inside. That afternoon, Cutter emerged from the factory with his smug grin plastered across his face. He waved a folder in the air. "Good news," he shouted. "Management has reconsidered. We're offering a select few of you your jobs back. Higher pay even. But only for those smart enough to abandon this little tantrum." The crowd murmured. Some workers looked tempted. Hungry families, unpaid bills, it was hard to ignore. Diego stepped forward. "Don't listen. They're trying to divide us. If one of us breaks, all of us lose." But Cutter smirked. "Not everyone sees it that way, Morales." Later that night, 2 workers slipped away from the picket line. By morning, they were inside the factory, working under Cutter's watchful eye. The strike was cracking. Tension grew between the strikers. Every whispered conversation seemed suspicious. Every tired glance felt like betrayal. Then, one evening, Diego caught sight of a familiar jacket disappearing into an alley. He followed quietly. There, under the dim glow of a streetlight, stood Halford, meeting with Marcus, one of the strikers Diego trusted most. Diego froze. His heart pounded in his ears. "Keep them agitated," Halford was saying. "Feed me everything Morales plans. And when this is over, we'll make sure you're rewarded." Marcus nodded. Understood. Diego's blood ran cold. Betrayal wasn't just possible, it was happening. The next morning, Diego confronted Marcus in front of the workers. "You've been selling us out." Marcus's face twisted with fake outrage. "That's a lie." But Ellen stepped forward, holding up her recorder. "I got the whole conversation last night. Halford didn't even realize I was standing behind the dumpster." The strikers erupted in shouts. Some lunged toward Marcus, but Diego held them back. "No violence," he said firmly. "That's what they want. They want us to look like thugs." Still, Marcus's betrayal left scars. Trust was fragile now. Every person was a potential traitor. As if things weren't bad enough, Diego returned home that evening to find his apartment door kicked open. Papers scattered, furniture overturned, and on the wall, scrawled in black spray paint, "Quit or next time it's your kid." Diego's stomach dropped. "Sophia," he whispered. Sophia sat trembling on the couch, hugging her stuffed bear. She hadn't been hurt, but her eyes were wide with terror. "Papa, I don't want you to go back," she whispered. "They're going to hurt us." Diego pulled her close, his heart breaking. He wanted to promise her safety, but the truth weighed heavy. He couldn't guarantee it anymore. Sophia's teacher called the next day. "She's been quiet, withdrawn. Something's wrong at home, isn't it?" Diego lied, forcing a smile into his voice. "Just stress. She'll be okay." But he knew Sophia wasn't okay. None of them were. On the 10th day of the strike, the workers gathered again at the gates. Spirits were low. Fear and hunger gnawed at their resolve. Halford appeared once more, flanked by guards. He shouted through a megaphone, "This is your last chance. End this nonsense or face permanent blacklisting. No factory in the region will ever hire you again." The crowd wavered. Some looked ready to break. Then Ellen stepped forward, holding her recorder high. "I've gathered enough evidence. Fraud, unsafe conditions, illegal firings. I can take this national. But I need you to stand strong just a little longer." Diego's voice rose above the doubt. "They're trying to scare us into silence. But fear won't feed our families. Fear won't protect us. Only courage will. If we walk away now, they win forever." The workers roared in approval, renewed by his words. The strike wasn't over. Not yet. But Diego knew the enemy was getting desperate. And desperate enemies were dangerous. The 11th day dawned cold and gray. The picket lines stretched thin, the workers' voices hoarse, their signs weathered from wind and rain. But still they stood. Inside the factory gates, engines roared again. Replacement workers shuffled between machines under cutters' orders. But the production lines lagged. The scabs didn't know the machines like the original workers did. Mistakes piled up. Output stalled. From the outside, the strikers could hear cutters' rage echoing even through the thick steel walls. That night, a piercing alarm shattered the silence. Smoke billowed from a factory window. Sirens wailed. The strikers rushed to the gates, shouting for answers. Guards shoved them back, barking orders. Flames licked the sky as chaos erupted inside. By dawn, the truth leaked out. One of the replacement workers had been severely burned in a machine malfunction. The cause? A safety switch disabled. Ellen cornered a supervisor leaving the scene. "Who tampered with the equipment?" she demanded. The man paled. "No one knows. But management's saying it's the strikers. Sabotage." Diego's fists tightened. He knew it wasn't them. But proof didn't matter. The headlines already screamed, "Strike turns deadly." The next day, police cruisers lined the street. Officers in riot gear stood shoulder to shoulder. Cutter stood smugly behind them, arms folded, eyes glittering with triumph. A captain barked through a megaphone. "This is an unlawful assembly. Disperse immediately or face arrest." Fear rippled through the crowd. Mothers clutched children tighter. Fathers pulled their families back. But Diego stepped forward, holding up his hands. "We're peaceful. We're unarmed. We're exercising our rights." The captain didn't flinch. "Move, or we move you." The workers looked to Diego. If they backed down now, everything was lost. Ellen whispered urgently, "Diego, don't give them an excuse. One wrong move and they'll crush this strike with headlines and handcuffs." Diego's jaw tightened. Slowly he raised his voice. "Brothers, sisters, sit down." One by one, the strikers lowered themselves to the ground. A sea of workers sitting in silence, defying without violence.
The officers shifted uncomfortably. Cutter's smirk faltered. The standoff lasted hours. Cameras captured every moment. The world was watching. That night, Diego's phone buzzed with an unknown number. "Quit now," the voice hissed. "Next time, it won't just be a warning. It'll be your daughter." The line went dead. Diego collapsed against the wall, his hands trembling. He wanted to run, to take Sofia and disappear. But he also knew that if he left, every worker who had placed their hope in him would crumble. Sofia noticed the fear in his eyes. "Papa, are we safe?" He forced a smile. "As long as we don't give up, Mihija, we're safe." But the words tasted like lies. 2 nights later, violence erupted. As the strikers gathered near the gates, a truck suddenly plowed toward the crowd. Screams tore through the night. People dove aside, signs splintering beneath the wheels. The truck skidded to a halt. The driver, a hired guard, leapt out swinging a baton. Other guards rushed in, fists flying. Chaos exploded. Workers fought to defend themselves. Shouts and cries filled the air. Diego tackled one of the guards to the ground, narrowly dodging a swing meant for his head. Around him, workers scrambled, bloodied but unbroken. Ellen's camera rolled through it all. And then the police arrived. But instead of arresting the attackers, they arrested the strikers. Diego's wrists were yanked back, cold steel biting his skin. His daughter's face flashed in his mind as the captain shoved him into the squad car. "This strike is over," the captain growled. Hours later, Diego sat in a dim holding cell, his clothes torn, his body aching. Despair washed over him. The strike had reached its breaking point. Then faintly he heard shouting outside, "Free the workers! Justice for the strikers!" Through the tiny barred window, Diego glimpsed a crowd, bigger than ever. Neighbors, students, other unions, activists, all rallying. Ellen's footage of the assault had gone viral, sparking outrage across the city. The strike wasn't dying. It was spreading. Diego was released at dawn. Bruised but unbowed, he returned to the picket line. The workers greeted him with cheers, their resolve fiercer than ever. But Cutter wasn't finished. Inside the factory, whispers spread. Another accident. Another explosion. This time, someone was dead. And the blame? Once again pointed at the strikers. The truth twisted into a weapon. And Diego knew the next move would decide everything. The 12th day began with grief. A young replacement worker had died in the night. Management wasted no time twisting the story. "Sabotage," Halford announced to the press, his face grave with manufactured sorrow. "The strikers have blood on their hands." Cutter stood beside him, smirking faintly, as if savoring each word. The crowd outside the gates erupted in outrage. "Lies!" they shouted. "We never touched those machines." But the damage was done. Headlines screamed, "Strike turns deadly. Agitators TO blame." Public opinion wavered. Diego's chest burned with fury. They had fought for justice, and now they were being painted as killers. Ellen Pierce refused to let the truth die. She spent sleepless nights digging, interviewing scabs, photographing evidence, following paper trails. And then she found it. Buried in company memos was a damning detail. Cutter himself had ordered the safety overrides weeks before the strike. Profits before people. Production before protection. Ellen burst onto the picket line waving the documents. They knew. They disabled the safety systems to cut costs. The accidents weren't sabotage. They were management's fault. The workers erupted in cheers. Proof. Finally, proof. But Halford moved fast. That same evening, Ellen's apartment was broken into, her files stolen, her laptop smashed. She sat trembling in the dark, whispering into her recorder, "If you're hearing this, it means they got to me. But the truth can't be buried forever." Word spread quickly. The strike had grown into a movement. Thousands flooded the streets outside the factory. Students, parents, fellow workers. Entire families chanting, holding signs, demanding justice. Justice for the workers. End corporate greed. The police lined up again, shields raised, batons ready. Cutter and Halford watched from the balcony, their faces pale now, realizing they had lost control. Diego stood at the front, his daughter Sophia clutching his hand. He lifted a megaphone, his voice breaking through the chaos. "They tried to silence us. They tried to divide us. They even tried to kill us. But we are still here, and we will not be broken." The crowd thundered in response. Suddenly, a deafening blast shook the ground. Smoke and fire erupted from inside the factory. Windows shattered. Alarms wailed. The crowd screamed. Panic rippled. Through the smoke, guards and scabs fled, coughing, their faces streaked with soot. Cutter stumbled out, blood on his forehead, eyes wild with terror. "This wasn't supposed to happen," he shouted, as if confessing to invisible judges. "We just wanted to scare them. Just scare them." But it was too late. The factory was burning, its secrets going up in flames. Ellen's footage of the explosion, paired with her recovered audio recordings, spread like wildfire online. Cutter's panicked confession was broadcast worldwide. The narrative flipped overnight. The strikers weren't villains, they were survivors, heroes, victims of a corporation that had gambled with human lives for profit. The governor ordered a full investigation. Cutter was arrested for criminal negligence. Halford vanished, fleeing under the cover of night. And the workers, they were reinstated, paid restitution, their union recognized. For the first time, their voices mattered. Weeks later, the factory gates reopened, not as a place of silence and fear, but as a place rebuilt by those who had fought for it. Safety systems restored, fair wages secured, respect earned. Diego walked through the gates, Sophia at his side. "Papa," she whispered, her eyes wide. "You won." He smiled faintly. "No, Mija, we won." Every voice that refused to stay silent. Together we won. The machines roared back to life. But this time they didn't sound like chains. They sounded like freedom. Months later, a mural appeared on the wall of the town square. It showed a line of workers standing tall, fists raised, with the words, "The silent strike," when voices became thunder. People came from miles away to see it. Students studied it in classrooms. Activists invoked it in speeches. The strike that began in silence had ended in a roar that echoed far beyond the factory walls. And though the scars remained, so did the lesson. No matter how powerful greed becomes, unity will always burn brighter. The silent strike may be over, but its lesson lives on. Silence can be broken, and justice can prevail. What did you think of this story's ending? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories of justice and resilience.